The maid and I found a cave and took a temporary rest there. The maid felt guilty about what she had done before, and expressed her inner thoughts to me. I wasn't angry, but advised her not to do it again next time. Then, the maid and I began to analyze Aluka's current situation. In order for the worst to happen, I decided to go with the maid to stop Aluka, but the maid disagreed with my approach. At this moment, I discovered a magical place in the cave. This is a very quiet and slightly dim cave. Not far away, a waterfall flows from a high place into a small lake near the cave. The sound of gurgling water echoes in this cave. Moen and Anne are very lucky. After jumping into the large lake, they slowly drifted to the vicinity of this cave, and fell into this small lake with the flow of the water. Moen helped the injured Anne into the cave. He tore off one sleeve from his clothes and bandaged Anne's feet. "It may hurt a bit, bear with it for a moment." Anne nodded and replied, Due to Anne's severe foot injury, when Moen was bandaging her, she felt a slight pain in her foot. She let out a soft moan. She lifted her head slightly and closed her eyes. She covered her mouth with her hand to prevent her voice from being heard by Moen. Moen gently tied a knot around Anne's ankle with a cloth to prevent any blood from flowing out. He said to Anne, "This should be no problem." Based on his observation of Anne's feet just now, Moen told Anne what he knew. "Your Achilles tendon needs to wait for us to go back before we can see a doctor for treatment. But at least your bleeding has stopped." Anne nodded lightly. However, she showed a puzzled expression and seemed a bit confused. Although she had no questions about her injuries, there seemed to be something she hadn't figured out yet. She maintained a posture of lifting her feet and looked at him, asking him, "Young master, I don't understand." Moen noticed that Anne had some questions and wanted to ask him. He looked up at Anne and said to her, "What don't you understand?" And showed an embarrassed expression. She hesitated for a moment, then looked into Moen's eyes, and expressed her inner thoughts to him. "I did that to young master, and even imprisoned you, and took possession of you. Young master must really dislike me. Just now, you could have simply left me behind." She feels very guilty about what she did before. She thought that Moen would feel very angry about her past actions. Moen didn't have a strong reaction to what Anne said. He looked at her silently and said calmly, "So, do you now realize that you were wrong?" And bravely admitted her mistake, and began to reflect seriously on what she had done from before until now. I'm indeed wrong. Previously, when I was helping the young master catch fish, I had an interaction with Aluka. She has turned into evil follower, and I need to take great responsibility, and for what I did to the young master before, and feels very guilty about the current situation of Aluka. She didn't want Aluka to turn into that terrifying appearance. She only taught her some methods about loving others, but she didn't expect that these skills would lead her down the wrong path and even put her under the control of the evil god. "Young master, don't you blame me? My behavior almost killed you." And held her face with both hands, and looked at Moen with a disappointed expression. She thought she had done so many wrong things that Moen would never pay attention to her again. However, She did not expect that Moen would still choose to save her from the attack of Aluka, and even bandage her wound. She didn't understand his intention behind doing so. Moen didn't immediately answer what Anne said. He extended his hands and suddenly grabbed her hands. He said to her, "Well, to be honest, your actions towards me are indeed very unreasonable. However, love is not inherently wrong. It's just that you expressed your love in the wrong way. Since you know you're wrong, just correct it. After all, the original intention behind your actions was only to possess me, not to harm me, right?" Moen gently grasped Anne's wrist and slowly lifted it upwards. "Cheer up. Look, I'm perfectly all right now. In the future, you can't be so stubborn anymore, all right?" Moen placed Anne's hands on his cheeks. He lifted his head and gave Anne a bright smile, hoping she wouldn't be sad. In fact, he didn't blame her or get angry with her as Anne imagined. He knew that what Anne did to him had a reason. Upon hearing what Moen said, Anne was deeply moved. She froze in place and couldn't say a word. She slightly widened her eyes, somewhat unable to believe what she saw about Moen. She whispered, "Young master." Seeing Anne's reaction, Moen felt very happy. In fact, the words he said to Anne also had another purpose. He closed his eyes and said excitedly in his heart, "Great! I am too smart." Judging from Anne's expression, she must have listened to my words. Now, her abnormal attributes should be able to. Suddenly, Moen felt a gentle touch on his mouth. He opened his eyes and found Anne leaning forward, quickly approaching him. Anne closed her eyes and gave Moen a kiss full of her emotions. The suddenness of the gesture brought a faint blush to both Anne and Moen's cheeks. Anne fell into Moen's arms and hugged him tightly. Moen has some doubts about Anne's behavior. He felt a bit at a loss about this. He didn't know why she suddenly kissed him. He lowered his head and looked at Anne in his arms, whispering softly, "Anne, you." Anne gently closed her eyes and pressed her head tightly against Moen's shoulder. She placed one hand on his shoulder and the other on his neck. She took a deep breath and immersed herself in Moen's embrace. She felt her body relax a lot. She said to Moen, "Pure and warm, sincere and gentle, young master, you are indeed the same as 10 years ago. Attempting to tarnish you into my color with time is the most foolish thing I have ever done. I'm wrong." Now, at this moment, Anne supported Moen's shoulder and slowly stood up. "My young master's energy has been replenished. Now, I have recovered to my best state. For the sake of the young master, even if it were a deity, I would kill him." And activated her magic, and shaped her magical energy into a dagger. She tightly held the dagger and stared ahead with a serious expression. Moen's embrace and the kiss she gave him restored her spirit a lot. She thought she had gotten enough rest, and it was time to go out and continue stopping Aluka. As Anne was about to take a step forward, her feet suddenly started to hurt again. She couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Her face showed a distressed expression. Her body leaned slightly forward, ready to fall to the ground. Seeing Anne lose balance, Moen felt very worried. He said to Anne, "Be careful." He immediately reached out his hands and caught Anne, who was about to fall to the ground. Moen carefully hugged Anne and let her lean against him in a relaxed posture. He said to her, "You just lost a lot of blood, and now you are very weak. Don't force yourself." And let out a soft sigh and said, "Indeed, I am still too weak. If I could be stronger." Hearing that Anne was still blaming herself, Moen comforted her. All right. I'll go outside and see if Aluka has caught up with us. You can rest here for a while." Moen walked to the entrance of the cave and poked his head out, carefully observing the situation outside. Fortunately, apart from the sound of gurgling water, there was no sound or figure of Aluka outside. Moen whispered, "There is no sound outside. We should still be safe for now."